where is the future of logistics going. So it was excellent preparation for me to at least address a few points for today. And if you look at the mega trends that people are talking about, the trends that we believe the world is moving towards, clearly right on top of that is sustainability. And I think we're seeing efforts to improve our sustainable growth, to reduce the imprint that we make on the environment, to be manifest in all of the future planning, policies and technology investments across the world. And this is leading to the driving of technology and the use of technology in very interesting ways. We all know about the efforts from major metropolitan communities, London for example, that imposes a congestion tax and therefore manages the manner of use of transport within the city. Very interestingly today, there is immediately a whole range of flowering technologies related to supporting this. In fact, there are websites now springing up that literally become an app on your iPhone that basically says, I want to go from point A, it could be, let's say, Buckingham Gate in London to Champs-Élysées in Paris. And the purpose of this website or this app is to tell you the lowest CO2 footprint mode of getting from point A to point B within constraints. So you can start to now say that we have an ability to access data and systems and therefore tailor and monitor the way in which we might plan logistics and movement. The second major mega trend, of course, is urbanization. I think there's been a very, very interesting study by McKinsey recently about the impact of urbanization, but the numbers are staggering. And it's talking about a 10 to 15 year horizon, and what is appalling, what is scary to see is that every factor of our performance today has to be multiplied by 8 or 10 times at a minimum. For instance, the level of urbanization is going to be scary and is going to place a huge burden on what we can do with logistics. Connectivity. Today, we're all with 3-4 devices and we're always connected. We get messages, we get bleeps, we get blogs, we get Twitter messages. But today we're a connected society. And this element of connectivity is now having a huge impact on logistics. Today, a company like Maersk will track every container at every second of its transit, and not just track where it is, but figure out what the temperature of the contents are, and all of this monitored at a central location so that if there is an exception in activity, somebody can take action on this. And we have a company here, our subsidiary Defines, that's actually working with deploying these kinds of solutions for data analytics and therefore report and intervention. Again, connectivity. I don't know how many of you know that 2,000 of our buses here in Chennai are fitted with telematics devices that Ashok Leyland has developed, which essentially allows these buses to communicate back to a home base, and this now has led to the same you could imagine. We've really thought about some of these in the concept of an air traffic control. We saw the huge line of trucks lining up for the Chennai port. This is a common occurrence for any one of us who travels north of Manali. And frankly, can you imagine that if all of these trucks were to be connected in such a way that just like an air traffic controller will tell the Jet Airways aircraft from Bangalore to slot in behind the Indigo flight landing in from Trivandrum, that technology is available for us today to deploy on trucks and avoid a massive queue up north with devices which tell the driver by SMS when he should drive up to which part of the intersection and provide this information dynamic in real time so that we avoid huge amounts of congestion and, more importantly, huge amounts of CO2 emission. Idling trucks or trucks clogging roads create CO2 unnecessarily. So this is not rocket science. We can do this with the technologies we have today. Another mega trend is pay-per-use. I think slowly society is beginning to say, and certainly environments are pushing this idea, that the user must pay. Now, there are going to be, if somebody wants to go around in a big BMW, Today, the societal response is fine. Let him do so, but as long as he pays the true cost of using that, whether that cost is an economic cost or an environmental cost, we must make sure that the user pays a proportional share of his impact on either space or CO2 emission. And this too is becoming a very dynamic situation. Today, one of the same defines company of ours is implementing a system in Europe. Europe is now beginning to move to toll collection on highways, not on the basis of passing a toll gate, but on the basis of tracking electronically data from tachographs on vehicles. And so, if he drives 323 kilometers, he gets toll paid for 323 kilometers, not based on when he crossed a toll gate. This is again a situation of truly coming back to saying who uses the infrastructure, who uses systems, they pay. And we have today technologies to be able to do this. Multimodal is another global trend. At the same conference, I was astonished to see that people in this quest for economic optimization are now looking for all kinds of ways to use multimodal connectivity and yet optimize the total cost, as Mr. Shivaraman was saying. So, for instance, this was a presentation from the famous P.V. Schenker, part of Deutsche Bahn, a very large global logistics company. And today they are operating a system where they have quick freight, which is a multi-mode use of air and sea freight. What they find is that if you look at air freight coming into Dubai, there's a lot of material coming into Dubai by air freight, very little going out. So you can imagine the arbitrage in air freight rates coming in and going out of Dubai. So what they do is sea ship to Dubai and air freight from Dubai back to Europe. And in the reverse direction, they air freight down to Hong Kong, and then they sea freight from there. So they're really using multimodal systems to achieve a combination of speed and cost, taking advantage of system capacities and system availability. And this is going to hugely optimize and speed the whole way in which we work with logistics. But this will require systems that are going to be conducive to this multimodal connectivity. We can't have this work if the airport is going to be 10 kilometers away from the seaport, but for all practical purposes, 1 day's road trip away. It's going to destroy that entire system. Collaborative. I think this pressure on cost and CO2 is forcing people now to be looking for ways to collaborate. I was astonished to find that the two largest biscuit distribution companies in the city of London actually share the same trucks. They have found that their pressures on reducing their CO2 footprint has been so acute that the two biggest rivals, this is like Coca-Cola and Pepsi coming together and saying, you know what, can we use the same truck to deliver to our retail stores in the inner cities? But this is happening because there is pressure to reduce the CO2 footprint and pressure to reduce costs. And finally, of course, all of this is being enabled by vehicular technologies, and I think these vehicular technologies span everything from engine systems, emission, fuels, and electronics, and I won't bore you with details of that today. For us to address this concept, this whole topic for us in Chennai and the topic of this conference, I really think we have to spur urgent action. I think there are things that we have to do with basic infrastructure. By basic infrastructure, we're talking about basically getting the road systems in place, getting the connectivity systems in place. And while we have a lot of investment going on in all of this, I think in India, we always say, we appreciate the progress, but we just need to move even faster and with even greater urgency. I think this business of connectivity and the ability for systems to be multimodal so that both Mr. Srikanth and I can both be happy about our relative modes being effectively harnessed at the same time, I think this is going to require careful thinking and planning. I think a greater emphasis on leverage of IT, and this is a great opportunity for Chennai and a great opportunity for India. A lot of these system efficiencies are going to come out of efficient deployment of IT and data. And that we know how to do very well in India. So we have great levers in our hands to be able to improve this element of freight logistics. And finally, planning. I think we truly must must plan not for the next 5 years, we must plan for the next 20 years and the next 50 years. And I think this is going to be very critical that such planning is comprehended. I know there is a very large body of work underway for the Greater Chennai Master Plan. I think this planning must now be very strongly done with the involvement of all the key stakeholders. I'll conclude with just two themes. I think it's quite often that we all sit around and complain about what's going on, but that doesn't get us anywhere. I think to move forward, to continue to build the Chennai that we love and the Chennai that we want to build in for the future, I think clearly the three stakeholders have to come together. Three stakeholders, I mean the citizenry, government and industry. We have to come together to start to constructively work with people, use knowledge, use information that we have, work constructively with the government and see how we can create a better Chennai for the future. And secondly, that we must aspire that Chennai does not merely catch up. We must aspire for a contemporary, forward-looking Chennai, so that the history that we have inherited, the history that was glorious in its tradition of trade over such a large part of the globe, will return to us, and Chennai will truly earn its reputation, not just as Detroit of India, but as an industrial hub in this part of the world. That, I'm sure, is something that we can build, and I would like to thank the organizers for even focusing on this and putting together such a program. Thank you.
As you mentioned, already the stakeholders are here, the industry, the government and the citizens group, as Dr. Sumantran represents the City Connect also. Thank you very much for pointing out that technology could be a great help for reducing carbon emission as well as for increasing the economic output of the industry, the business. That's why we talk about eco-2 cities now, ecological and economic cities. Any city can be eco-2 city if we can address these two. Thank you, sir. We will now invite Mr. T.K. Ramachandran IAS to officially or formally inaugurate this conference. Mr. Ramachandran is an IAS of the 1991 batch. He holds a Master of Technology degree in Computer Science from the IIT Delhi and BTech from IIT Kharagpur.
To all of you, it's always a difficult task to speak after two brilliant speakers have worked on the audience. And I was telling Mr. Sumantran, it was a brilliant speech. And sometimes you wonder, when you meet very famous names in person, you also feel whether you can stand up to the occasion and give an equally bright speech, but I'll try. Today's topic is very relevant. It speaks of carbon neutral Chennai, and being green is the flavor of the day, as all of you are aware. And talking about freight is again very relevant, especially in the context of Chennai and the context of the presentation which Mr. Srikanth made, giving you all those horrifying shots of congestion on some of our major roads. Well, we need to do something about it, and I'm glad that MMC, Madras Chamber of Commerce and City Connect and Athena Economics have got together this little seminar to try and look at ways to deal with all these issues. Now, starting with development, as long as we need development and as long as we need development without regional, social imbalances, we need transport, we need movement of freight, we need movement of goods, we need movement of passengers. And all that has an economic cost, it has an environmental cost. And we need to pay it. Often it is said that you can shift from transport from one mode to the other, and maybe you can get the benefit that gives you. But in the development process, you have to go through the grind. It is possible to leapfrog, like we have seen in the case of telecom. But in the case of transport, I don't know how that will happen. There has to be gradual progression from road to rail to water, whatever, to multimodal. It has to be a gradual process. So I'm glad that early in the day we had this debate about rail versus road. I was going to touch upon it. And then there was this initial debate about whether we should go in for rail or road. And then there was one word which Dr. Sumantran used, and that was collaborate. So now we will collaborate. Rail and road should collaborate, should integrate in such a way that both of them benefit, everyone benefits, the city benefits, and ultimately our goal of carbon neutrality is reached. So integration is very vital. Collaboration is vital. Being green is vital. We've all heard about the slogans of reduce, reuse and recycle. And I would add one more R to this, and which is refuse. Don't refuse to do things which are not carbon neutral. That is possible. But since we are now talking about transport, it is possible to say that I refuse to use modes which are not carbon neutral or which are excessively energy consuming. Of course, in this rail versus road debate, there is one aspect which we need to look at. The general consensus is that road transport is polluting. But rail also, when it comes to energy usage, even if it's electric haulage, still that electricity gets generated somewhere. It's only a localization of pollution. I would look at it that way. But I'm sure there are other studies which prove that rail is more efficient than road. Having said that, in Chennai, we need integration. We are at the stage of development where such integration is possible. In fact, it's a very interesting stage in the development of infrastructure in this country, in the state and in the city. Highly interesting, because you can actually develop, I can see it all happening. When you go to the US, it's all happened 50 years back, 100 years back. In much of the world, all this has happened in the developed world. And we are in the developing world where all this is happening and we can contribute to it. So Chennai, of course, I would not agree on this theme which looks at Chennai in isolation. Chennai is after all the capital city of a huge state, and it has a huge hinterland. And all freight transport happens to Chennai either because it's consumed, the goods are consumed here, or they pass through Chennai and they are evacuated via the 3 or 2 major ports and other minor ports, or goods are imported and need to be transported outside. So our efficiencies relates to the hinterland and to the consumption that happens within Chennai. Therefore, it is important that whatever we do, we need to plan. And we need to look at the framework under which this planning can happen, which would include, firstly, where does this freight come from? Where is it headed to? What is the kind of freight that we are dealing with? And how is it best managed? A large amount of traffic to Chennai comes from all over. It comes from the east, west, north. It comes from as far as Bangalore. Chennai port has a very famous, as an old port. It has a long history. And recently, it's only in recent times that we are grappling with issues of traffic. We are grappling with issues of congestion. And all this, if you look at all this, it actually has a basis in planning. Are we planning for the future? Are we planning for congestion? Are we planning for road, evacuation of the goods? As Dr. Sumantran pointed out, 10 times the garbage or 15 times the energy required, whatever. These are all things that we need to plan for. Now, how can we plan this? We've had several policy documents being spelled out at various points of time. Recently, as all of you are aware, we had the Vision 2023 document which was presented. So here, we are talking of 2,000 kilometers of roads being either 6 or 8 laned, 5,000 kilometers of roads being 4 laned, 16,000 kilometers of state highways being widened to at least 2 lane width, and the port capacity, the minor port capacity being increased to at least 150 million tons, increased by about 150 million tons. So all this is huge. The Honorable Chief Minister, when she made this announcement a couple of months back, was very aware of the need for planning for the future. So planning has to start now. If we have to do something over the next decade, planning has to start now, and planning is what we need to focus on. The Chennai Master Plan 2 also talks about freight movement. And you must have also heard or seen in the paper the announcements made relating to the Chennai peripheral road, Chennai Yellai Sarai. The Chennai peripheral road will link from Mahabalipuram and up to Ennore port, about 140 kilometers of road, which will take traffic out of the city. Basically freight, and the link to the ports where the evacuation takes place. So planning for, and then of course we have also announced, the Honourable Minister has announced on the floor of the Assembly the formation of ring roads, of bypasses to all major towns, all corporations, and then the outer ring road, and of course we have also talked about grids being formed in the area between CORR and the peripheral ring road. All this is basically planning to ensure that we have the infrastructure in place so that freight movement can take place seamlessly. Then the question of integration, rail and road integration, and with the movement by the sea. We were discussing just before this function was to start. We were discussing separately the experience in the movement, CNG buses, CNG autos. And now, I remember 20 years back when I was in Delhi, it used to be such a polluted city, and somehow you can visibly see that there is such a change in the way in the air you breathe. It's so much more clean. So also, there were other examples how Buckingham Canal can be used as a transport mode. All this will require enormous amounts of planning and technology. And then they broke the concrete covering of that river on the top of the river, and they restored the river back to its original shape. So these are all movements that are part of development. Any developing society has to go through these cycles. And it is possible that in Chennai we might at some point of time decide to do what Mr. Srikanth was suggesting. Of course, I don't know how much of it can be undone, but then these are all steps in the process of development which every nation has to go through. It's a learning process, and at some point of time someone might decide to do something. So on integration, a lot of work is being done. A lot of work is possible. And then on the sustainability issue, rail is certainly is more sustainable perhaps from the energy point of view. And we need to therefore look at technologies which will make even road transport sustainable. I'm just giving some ideas to Dr. Sumantran. Road transport can also become sustainable. Maybe never as much as rail. So are we investing